Hi, this is Jen Rubin, and this is Jen Rubin's Green Room. Welcome to Flag Day. Justice Alito, keep it right side up. Well, the Supreme Court has been busy this week. What it didn't give us was an opinion in the immunity case, which is quite frankly absurd. This case first went up to the Supreme Court about 6 months ago. If you remember, after Judge Chutkan made her ruling, the defense team appealed to the D.C. Circuit, and Jack Smith asked the Supreme Court then to intervene. The theory being that it was going to go to the Supreme Court eventually. Why not take it now? The Supreme Court said, oh, no, we need to let the D.C. Circuit take a step. So it did. Then, of course, Jack Smith made his appeal. The Supreme Court mulled it over, finally decided, yes, we do need to hear this case. What a surprise. Set a briefing schedule, then held the oral argument on one of the last possible days, and still has not issued the opinion. This is pretty obviously a stall. This is a service to Donald Trump. It is an effort to postpone his reckoning on the single most important case in American history, a former president's participation in a coup attempt, simply because they are in his corner. And you could tell they are in his corner from the kinds of questions that were asked and the kind of statements that were made at the oral argument. We saw Justice Alito, who has never taken the side of any criminal defendant, who has never met a death penalty case that he thought was flawed in any way, openly disparage, that is right, disparage the criminal justice system for which he is serving as a Supreme Court justice. Understand what he was saying. He was saying, well, we have to protect presidents because, after all, you can get anybody to issue an indictment through a grand jury. You can get any prosecutor to convict. There really aren't any kind of protections for defendants. Therefore, we might need to kind of extend something for President Trump. This is bizarre. This is the MAGA sort of denigration and delegitimization of the criminal justice system simply because it is being used against Trump. Remember, Alito doesn't have any problem with the criminal justice system when it's directed at Black and brown people or defendants who may be Democrats. It's only when it is turned on Donald Trump that he suddenly has these spasms of empathy and decides that there are no criminal protections that could prevent a future president, wink, wink, nod, nod, from getting prosecuted. Therefore, they're going to have to extend some kind of immunity to Donald Trump. Now, do I think he's going to get 5 justices to go along with that? I don't. But I do think that he and Justice Thomas, who, by the way, just revealed a few more gifts that he received from Harlan Crow, are aiming to do Donald Trump's dirty work. They're aiming to delay and to delay to make it certain that the American people do not have the benefit of a trial before they decide whether to elect him president again. I wish there would be some other explanation other than sheer corruption, financial, emotional, intellectual. But what we've seen from both Thomas and from Alito is a chip on their shoulder, a denigration of the American system, a willingness to use any and all means to put forth their, frankly, Christian nationalist view of America, whether it's on guns, as they did today, Friday, in outlawing or striking down, rather, the bump stock regulation that Trump passed, whether it has been on the regulatory powers of the executive branch, whether it's been on abortion, whether it's been really on any issue. They will take the side of the Christian nationalists by any means, no matter how intellectually dishonest, no matter how twisted. That's their goal. It is not the impartial administration of justice. It's getting their side to win. And why? Because justices, these are Supreme Court justices, the most privileged people in the world, have a giant chip on their shoulder. We saw it from Justice Alito and his wife, that they're willing to snub their nose at the Constitution, at the peaceful transfer of power. And we see it constantly from Justice Thomas in his financial corruption that is beyond belief, that would be accepted by no other judge, no other court in America. So that's a problem. It really is. And it could get worse. You say, how could it get worse? Well, take a look at some of the concurrences and dissents that Justice Thomas has put out there. He has opened up a question as to whether Brown v. Board of Education should be good law. What? Really? We're going to go back to segregated schools? Well, he seems to think that the Supreme Court back in 1954 overread its mandate because he brought it up in the South Carolina redistricting case. So maybe that's not good law. We know in Dobbs, he suggested that Griswold and other cases protecting contraception, protecting marriage, all sorts of substantive due process might not be good law. So these guys are radicals. And I think the Democrats have to do a good job of portraying for the American people, and for Democrats in particular, who may be kind of grumbly about Biden, they don't like this or they don't like that, or think he hasn't been quite resolute on one of their issues, to explain what the country would look like in a world in which Donald Trump, Clarence Thomas, and Sam Alito run the show. And I hearken back to a speech that the late Ted Kennedy made when Robert Bork, the pointy-headed intellectual right-wing lunatic, made when he was up for confirmation. Senator Kennedy then took to the floor of the Senate, made a famous speech. In Robert Bork's America, children would sit at segregated lunch counters. Women would have back alley abortions. And on he went. At the time, it was considered hyperbole, exaggeration. Now it's simply reading from the dissents of Clarence Thomas and Alito. That's the America they want. And the sooner Democrats are able to grapple with that and explain that to the American people, the better off we'll all be. Because what we've seen now is nothing compared to where they'll be if Donald Trump is back in power. Speaking of Donald Trump, he went to the Hill on Thursday to meet with his minions, his sycophants. And by all accounts, behind closed doors, he was a lunatic. Imagine that. He was ranting and raving. He was making his usual pity play. He was making all kinds of weird allegations about what Nancy Pelosi might have said about him. He was off the rails. But of course, the Republicans there would be remiss if they didn't cover for him. At one point, he, by several reports, said that Milwaukee, get this, which will host the Republican National Convention in July, is a horrible city. Imagine that. Well, of course, Speaker Johnson comes out and says, I was sitting right next to him and I didn't hear anything. Yeah, right. Well, God bless the Democrats. They finally figured out how to do this. Instantaneously, we have billboards up in the city of Milwaukee, reminding them that the President of the United States thinks their city is crap. So I think the Democrats are finally learned to explain to the American people how nutty he is. Now, it's shameful and inexcusable that Republicans themselves wouldn't come out, but we've known that that's been the case for a while. Meanwhile, he also reportedly met with a bunch of CEOs. According to CNBC reports, they were taken aback. He was ranting. He was raving. He was incoherent. Imagine that. But did any of those people come out on the record to say, listen, tax cuts are one thing, but we cannot have someone who is this deranged in the White House. We cannot have someone who is going to bring legal chaos and therefore financial chaos to our country. No, because they're enablers as well. They're scaredy cats as well. They're placing their bets, making sure that they're covered in case Donald Trump gets elected. And that, of course, is what happens when authoritarians make a play for power. People try to cut deals. They try to get on the good side of the wannabe dictator because they think they can get away with it. They think, oh, he won't come after me. They'll be immune from the real bad stuff, or if the real bad stuff is an exaggeration, they'll be able to handle it. Well, wrong. That's how authoritarians manage to get into power, and that's how they stay in power. Ask the business community in Hungary or any of the South American dictatorships. Ask the judges of Poland or of Hungary who were put under the thumb of those right-wing authoritarian regimes. It never quite works out the way the enablers imagine because, of course, they're kidding themselves. They're deluding themselves into thinking that they will be immune. It's just the fill in the blanks, LGBTQ Americans, the immigrant Americans, somebody else other than them. But, of course, the dictators, Donald Trump in particular, will stop at nothing. He will burn down the system. That's what he's trying to do with the legal system in order to attain power and keep power. And we kid ourselves in thinking that somehow he'll be more manageable this time, or in the words of the deluded Susan Collins, he's really learned his lesson. Well, I think he's learned the wrong lesson, and I think we know that all too well. So, meanwhile, we had this split screen once again. The President of the United States is representing us first at the Normandy commemorations, and then this week at the G7. He is putting forth a united front. He's coming up with a long-term game plan for sustaining Ukraine. And then at home, you have this crackpot who, ranting and raving behind closed doors, whether it's Republicans or CEOs, is attempting to avoid the legal system and to attain power. And if the American people looking at these two choices cannot figure out that Donald Trump is the most obviously unfit, unacceptable choice, then we get the government we deserve. Remember, Ben Franklin said, "A republic if you can keep it." You do wonder if we can keep it. But we should take solace. Several very good signs. First of all, if you like polls, and I don't like polls, but if it makes you feel any better, since the convictions, the polls suggest that Biden has gotten a 2 to 3% bump in the polls, which, oh, by the way, is a lot in an election where it's likely to be close. And by the way, I cannot fathom why it should be so close, but be that as it may. We're also seeing, as I noted, that the Democrats have gotten much better at this. They're taking advantage of the Donald Trump insanity. You have Kamala Harris going out front on the issue of a convicted convict, that you cannot have someone like that in the Oval Office. You see the response to the Milwaukee comment. So they're becoming more aggressive, more competitive, quicker off the draw. And lastly, I would say this. The more Donald Trump, the better, as far as I'm concerned. The press needs to do a better job of letting his blather get out and be on full exhibit for the American people. It needs to allow a minute or so of those crazy, I don't even want to deign to call them speeches. They're campaign routes, campaign events in which he rants and raves. But we do need to see what he really is like, because let's face it, he's nuts. He's absolutely nuts. Normal people don't talk this way. Normal people don't behave this way. Forget the glitches and the weird body movement. He is mentally unwell. And the sooner the American people come to grips with that, I think the better we'll all be. So, good news is, I think we're on the right track. I think President Biden is clearly on the right track. Kamala Harris, as I wrote this week, is hitting it on all cylinders in terms of prosecuting the case, pardon the pun, against Donald Trump. And I think the reality of Donald Trump is beginning to hit home. And remember, mark your calendars, July 11th, that is sentencing day. And we'll find out whether the Republican nominee for president is going to have to face a jail sentence, unless he cons the American people once more into putting him into office. So, there you have it. Make sure you vote. Make sure people you know vote. Volunteer your time, volunteer money, and make sure democracy lives to fight another day. If you like this program and you like our other programs, please tell your friends. They can listen and follow. They can click right there on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever they get their podcasts. Bye-bye.